Welcome everybody to our fall Frank Rhodes lecture series here at Arizona State University. My name is Minu Ai. I'm Vice Chair and Managing Director of the University Design Institute. And on behalf of the organizing team here, I want to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Michael Smith, who will deliver our lecture today. Before we introduce him and get the lecture going, I'd like to take a moment to share a little bit about the lecture series itself, for those of you who are joining us for the first time. ASU's president, Dr. Michael Crow, created the Frank Rhodes Lecture Series in 2011 in honor of Frank Rhodes, who served as president of Cornell University from 1977 to 1995. Frank Rhodes is considered one of the most impactful university presidents of the 20th century, driving a vision to fundamentally change the education and cultural landscape of higher ed. During his almost 22-year tenure at Cornell, he changed the course of the university. His unfailing drive and perseverance to bolster student and faculty diversity is legendary. Diversity on Cornell's campus increased, with the number of women and minority faculty members doubling, and the percentage of minority students almost tripling. Research funding increased from 88 million to over 300 million annually. He also led successful fundraising campaigns to redesign the Cornell landscape for generations to come. In 2001, he published a book called The Creation of the Future, which discussed the responsibilities and possibilities of American higher education. His ideas were powerful, important, future-focused, and really shaped the new American university idea that we have been evolving here at ASU. So through this lecture series, we honor Frank Rhodes and his vision to shape higher education in this country. Our scholars are thoughtfully and carefully chosen. They are leaders and experts who in their own fields are pushing forward ideas for 21st century higher education. They're individuals who have and are advancing bold ideas and forcing us all to think about what we should be doing within our institution and across higher education more broadly. So these lectures are meant to inspire, inform, and educate us and support our ongoing journey of transformation at Arizona State University. A couple of housekeeping things before we get into introductions. We will have Dr. Crow introduce Dr. Smith. He will deliver his lecture for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 45 minutes for Q&A and discussion. Please add your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can add those questions at any point in the lecture. I will make sure to try and get as many of them into conversation when we get into the Q&A section. We will also be recording this lecture. It will be available on our Frank Rhodes Lecture Series website, should you want to look at it again or share it with somebody who you think would find this conversation valuable. So with that, I want to welcome everybody to this lecture and turn it over to Dr. Crow to introduce our speaker.
Well, thank you, Manu. It really is another exciting day for us at ASU and the Frank Rhodes Lecture Series, because we go out and try to find those people that are intellectually, honestly, and fervently interested in designing these creative enterprises like universities in ways in which our society can continue to progress, our democracy can continue to evolve. And Mike Smith, from his role as the Erik Jonsson Professor of Information Technology and Policy at the Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon, is one of these sort of hybrid thinkers, trained on the technical side of things. He's applying all of that knowledge, from engineering to information science to his analytical skills and so forth and so on, to design questions around a lot of topics, including higher education. And so he hit on, and this is what really attracted us to Mike, on this notion of the abundant university. So we basically still have, in my view, institutions that are overly Middle Ages, that is not middle-aged, but from the Middle Ages in their design. They're in general creators of significant new knowledge from which innovations occur, but are in general not particularly innovative themselves. And they also are built in ways in which they they don't operate on a theory of human abundance. They often operate on a theory of human deficit. And so Mike brings together both analytics, data, design capabilities, modeling capabilities. He's able to look at systems that are underperforming, like higher education, and put analytical truth on the table relative to why it's underperforming. And so we've got a real treat, because we've got an architect level person who uses engineering and analytical skills to think about important systems like higher education. So Mike, it really is an honor to have you here, and looking forward to your lecture, and appreciate you making the digital trip.
President Crow, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. This is just a wonderful honor to have a chance to talk to y'all and share some of the things I've been thinking about, and also talk to people who are at ASU, which I used frequently as an example of excellence in the book. So if you'll let me share my slides. So as President Crow said, the book is titled The Abundant University, and the reason I wanted to title it The Abundant University is to draw a contrast between the university based on scarcity that I think we have right now. So a lot of my research thinks about, when you add digital technology to a marketplace, how does that change how buyers and sellers, if you will, behave? How does that change how the marketplace is structured? And how does it change competition? I got really interested in this in the context of the entertainment industry starting in around 2000. So my dissertation was based on physical products that were sold in digital marketplaces. But around 2000, we started to see, particularly in the entertainment industry, the product become digital. And once the product became digital, you could do all sorts of really interesting things that just weren't possible in a physical marketplace. You could create direct understanding of how the customer is using the product, right? So if I'm selling a DVD, I have no idea who buys it, what else they watch, when they watch. But once I distribute that same movie digitally, I can understand, when the person watches it, what else do they watch, how often do they watch it? And then the second thing I can do is I can customize the channel, the delivery channel, to use the data to improve the utility of the person watching the content, right? So in a broadcast television world, everybody has to watch the same thing at 8 o'clock. On Netflix, I can customize exactly what you see and what's promoted to you in ways that I'm going to argue in a second not only benefit the consumer, but also benefit the creators, benefit the content itself. Okay, so I got interested in that. And then as I was playing around with the entertainment industry, I started to wonder about whether higher education might have similar characteristics to what we were seeing in the entertainment industry. And that got us, that got me to think about this book, The Abundant University, where I'm trying to make three main points in the book. The first one is higher education will change. The second one is, I think we in higher education should want to embrace this change. And the third one is, I think we have a way to embrace this change. Now, prepping for this talk, what I realized is most other settings where I've given this talk, I've given it to a group of people who don't believe either one or two is true. They believe that the university won't change and that there's no reason to embrace this change. Talking at Arizona State University, you guys are kind of in the honors section, if you will. So instead of the regular lecture I give to a normal class, I'm going to focus on you as honors students, and I'm going to spend less time on the first 2 points than I normally would, and hopefully leave us enough time to talk about the last point, okay? So first of all, technology will change higher education. What am I saying here? The thing I want to say here is, as we were talking to the entertainment industry about technology in their context, what we kept hearing was, how can I use this new technology to do what I've always done? right? How can I use the internet to sell movies the way I've always sold them, or sell CDs the way I've always sold them? And we started to wonder whether that was the right way to think about it. We also started to wonder whether the digitization process was going to affect competition in the entertainment industry. And in 2015, my colleague and I invited a senior executive at one of the big 6 studios to come talk to our class and explain how technology was changing his business. And he gave a wonderful talk. And then during the Q&A time, my colleague Rahul asked him, are you at all worried about the threat that Amazon, Netflix, and Google might pose to your business? Again, 2015. And he said, you know what? My business is different. The same 6 studios have dominated my industry for the last 100 years. There's a reason for that. And by implication, that's not going to change. Okay. And this is a wonderful sort of mic drop quote to use in class, because in 2024, the students get really angry. You know, how could somebody be so stupid and narrow-minded and not see what was going to change in his industry? And you sort of let them indulge that anger and frustration for, you know, five minutes or so. And then you say, but wait a second. Let's remember that in 2015, what he was saying is 100% true. The same 6 studios had dominated his industry for the last 100 years. And it's not like the internet was the first technological shift they'd faced. They'd faced massive shifts in every aspect of how content was created, distributed, and consumed. And yet the same 6 studios maintained their dominance. So what we need to do is think about, why was 2015 and the years following it any different than what they'd faced for the last 100 years? And the theory my colleague and I came up with, and we published this in a book about the entertainment industry, but the theory my colleague and I came up with is this all comes down to scarcity. Scarcity is the basis for market competitive advantage. And for the last 100 years, the big 6 studios had dominated because they were able to control 3 key scarce resources. They were able to control scarcity in the financial and technical tools you needed to make content. They were able to control scarcity in the distribution and access to the distribution channels you needed to reach your audience. And they were able to use copyright law to create an artificial scarcity in how people got access to the content, right? So none of the technological shifts they'd faced over the past 100 years had changed the importance of those 3 key scarce resources. And what we believe is that the reason competition was changing in the 2015 timeframe was they were facing a set of simultaneous technological shifts that were making it easier to create content, and reducing the scarcity there, making it easier to distribute content, and making it easier to consume content through piracy, through channels that don't involve buying the content anymore. And that the new scarce resource was actually customer attention. And guess what? Netflix, Amazon, and Google owned their customer. Okay. Now, great. So what the heck does that have to do with education? Right around 2020, I heard the then president of Ohio State University get asked almost the same question. Are you at all concerned that new technologies might reduce the power of universities in the marketplace? And he gave a sophisticated answer, but what I heard him say was very similar to what I heard the studio executives say. What I heard him say is, you know what, my business is different. The same 62 universities have dominated my industry for the last 500 years. There's a reason for that, and that's not going to change. And so what I'm trying to argue in the book is that I think we can model university power in a very similar way to the way we modeled power in the entertainment industry. I think universities have dominated, the universities that have dominated the education market have dominated because they control scarcity in 3 key resources. They control access to the scarce seats in the classroom. They control access to the scarce faculty experts, whatever that means. And they control access to the scarce credentials that allow people to signal their knowledge in the marketplace. And I think MOOCs, which started in the 2012, massively online open courses, reduced the importance of the first two sources of scarcity. The reason I think the business hasn't changed that much, when some people have argued that MOOCs were going to change everything, the reason I think the business hasn't changed that much is because we haven't eliminated the scarcity in the credentials. You can take as many courses from edX or Coursera as you want. You still need that 4-year degree if you're going to signal your capability in the marketplace. If we were to create new ways for people to signal their credentials in the marketplace that didn't involve them paying, $250,000 and spending 4 years on college campuses, I think that would massively change power. And guess what? I think we're starting to see that in a lot of areas. And I'd be more than happy to talk about that in the Q&A time. Okay. Could you critique that theory? Absolutely. And that brings me to the second point I'd like to make, which is I think we in higher education should desperately want to embrace this change. Why do I say that? I was giving this talk, several months ago, and somebody stopped me and said, "You know what, Mike? What you're arguing is people, we need a new source of credentials." This is the wrong time to be arguing that. And it's the wrong time to be arguing that because all the economic theory shows that 4-year degrees have a positive return on investment, that 4-year degrees pay off in the marketplace. So we should be asking the student, as many students as possible, to go get 4-year degrees. And as I usually do, what I say is I'm really good at answering questions on the plane ride home. So 48 hours later, I realized what the answer to that was. And I think the answer is that you're absolutely right. Today, a 4-year degree pays off in the marketplace. And let me rephrase that. What you're saying is that the best way to become rich later in life is to get a 4-year degree. The other thing we know from the economic literature is that the best way to get a 4-year degree is to be rich. And when you put those two things together, we've actually created a terrible feedback loop that is perpetuating all sorts of socioeconomic injustices that I don't know anyone in higher education who's in favor of, okay? Why do I say that the best way to get a 4-year degree is to be rich? This is riffing off research done by Raj Chetty at Harvard University and his colleagues, where they looked at census data and combined it with a whole bunch of other data. And what they found is that children born into the top 1% of income are 77 times more likely to get admitted to a highly selective school than children born in the bottom 20%. Children in the top 1% are 77 times more likely to gain admission to a highly selective school than kids born into the bottom 20%. That's terrifying, friends. That is absolutely terrifying. As an economist, I can say that only makes sense if we in higher education genuinely believe that children born in the top 1% are 77 times more likely to be capable of an elite education than children born in the bottom 20%. And I don't know anyone who believes that. By the way, Raj Chetty and his colleagues did a follow-on study. So if you want to argue maybe kids in the top 1% generally are smarter, they did a follow-on study where they controlled for SAT scores. They controlled for standardized test scores. And what they found is that children in the top 1% are 0.1%, excuse me, are 2.2 times more likely to be admitted to an Ivy League college than children born in the bottom 20%, right? 2.2 times more likely, same SAT scores. The only thing that's different is how much their parents make, and I would argue how much their parents are likely to give to the school. One of the co-authors of that study said in an interview with the New York Times, what I conclude from this study is that the Ivy League doesn't have low-income students because the Ivy League doesn't want low-income students. A terrifying statement from a professor in an Ivy League school. Why is this? And I'm going to argue that this is not an accident. So I'm using this quote from my colleague Jason England, in Carnegie Mellon's English department, where he says, elite college admissions is at root a story of class warfare. It's not directly attributable to any fault or any desire on the part of admissions deans. Nobody wants this to happen. It's simply a byproduct of the parameters within which the system operates. I think these are deeply systemic problems related to the nature of the scarcity model that we have today. And because they're systemic, I don't think we can solve them by tweaking the existing system. I think what we need is a new system based on abundance rather than scarcity. Okay. And again, I'd be happy to unpack that in the Q&A time. Here's what I want to say at the end, and again, to spend a little bit more time on than I would in a normal talk of this type, right? We have a way to embrace this change. Why do I say that? Let's go back to the entertainment industry. What my colleagues and I saw as we were studying the entertainment industry is they initially saw technological change. They initially opposed technological change because they saw it as a huge threat to their business model, a huge threat to their way of doing business. And it was, right? What happened? At some point, I think what they realized is, yes, technological change is a threat to my business model, but my model is different than my mission. My mission is creating great entertainment and getting that entertainment in front of an audience. And I think right around the time they started to see Netflix, Amazon, and Google taking home a lot of the big awards at a lot of the big award ceremonies, they realized that technology might change my business model, but technology might allow me to create all sorts of shows that just wouldn't be possible in the traditional scarcity-based distribution model of entertainment. I remember having a conversation with a senior creative leader at one of the big 6 studios, where he said, and we were in sort of the studio dining room, and he sort of leaned forward and said quietly, so none of his colleagues could hear him say this, he said, Mike, a year ago, we sold my show to Netflix. I want you to look at the season of my show that Netflix just released, and you are going to see that it is in every way superior to what we did on the lot. The cinematography is better, the storytelling is better, and I just can't figure it out. And I think it was that realization that we can use technology to do things that advance our mission, even if it changes our business model, that allowed the entertainment industry to shift from the scarcity-based model they use to a model of abundance and create all sorts of shows that I just don't think would have worked in the traditional channel. And create something that many people have called a golden age of entertainment, okay? Where am I going with this? I think we're at a very similar point today in higher education. When I give this talk, when I talk to colleagues across the university, what I hear is a great deal of opposition to technological change. And I really think it's driven because we see technological change rightly as a threat to our business model. I would love for us to make the transition to wondering about, can technological change be a wonderful opportunity for us to advance our mission? Friends, if our mission is to help rich kids get a leg up in the job market, we're doing great, and there's no reason to change a thing. But that's not our mission. Our mission is helping students from all backgrounds get gain the knowledge they need, discover their skills, demonstrate the skills in the marketplace so they can use those skills to benefit society. And I really think that the one-size-fits-all scarcity-based model of the university that we've used so far is getting in the way of us fulfilling that mission. How can we go about fulfilling that mission? What I'm going to argue is that I would love for us to sit down and question everything about our existing processes in the light of our mission and in the light of digital abundance. What I see with a lot of organizations and institutions that I study is that they develop processes that are incredibly well suited to their technological environment, and they have trouble adapting those processes when the technological environment changes. They want to stick with what they've always done, even though the new technological environment will allow them to do new things, right? Let me give you an example. One of the exercises I do at the beginning of class, the entertainment class I teach, is everybody tell me, what your favorite show is right now. What are you watching right now? And then we explore how many of those shows would have worked in the 8 p.m. broadcast time slot, and on a traditional broadcast television show. And what we find is that most of them don't work anymore. The other thing I play around with is, again, when the music labels initially saw technology, they saw a new way of selling CDs online. What they didn't see was Spotify, an abundance-based model of consuming content that was highly customizable to the needs of the individual user and incredibly less expensive than buying that same music on CDs. So first of all, question everything about our processes, eliminate the processes we don't need anymore, and adapt our remaining processes to the new technology. I was talking with President Crow before we got on here. One of the things I'm playing around in class this year is grades, right? We have a policy of a bell-shaped grade distribution where about half the students get A's and about half the students get B's. This year, for the first time, I have tenure, so there's really not much that can be done to me. One of the advantages of tenure, what I did this year, after hearing a promotion and tenure case where someone was being criticized as not a good teacher. Why? Because they give too many A's. And again, there are two ways you can interpret that data. One is they're not a good teacher and they're just being lazy. The other is they're a fantastic teacher and they're bringing most of their students up to the A level. Which is it? What I wanted to do in my class this year is say, everybody gets an A in this class if you can convince me you've mastered the material. And here are the things I need to see from you for you to convince me you've mastered the material. All right. And what I've discovered is I think that attitude has actually made me a better teacher than I was in the world where I was trying to get half A's and half B's. When I see a student falling behind or maybe not participating in class enough, I now have the motivation, instead of saying, well, there's somebody else I can put in the bottom half of the distribution, to reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? Is there anything I can do to help? Okay. That's one thing I think we could play around with. Another thing I think we could play around with is exploring new ways of adapting how we deliver education to the capabilities of these new channels. Let me give you a specific example. This is my daughter, Molly. Molly is a CMU engineering student, civil engineering. And she's also, this is her taken in high school when she was the president of the STEMinist club at her high school. So take feminism and combine it with STEM and you have STEMinism, okay? So my STEMinist daughter wants to take AP Physics in the senior year of her high school. And what she hears from her high school is, I'm sorry, Molly, you can't take AP Physics because you don't have AP Calculus, and you can't take AP Calculus because you don't have pre-calculus, and you can't take pre-calculus because we're not offering it this summer, so you're out of luck. This didn't work for me and my wife. And in fact, because I did research in this area, I knew that there was a platform that allowed people to take calculus online at their own pace, and would give them calculus credit at the University of Pittsburgh. And so what my wife and I went back to the school and said is, if our daughter finishes this calculus class and with credit at the University of Pittsburgh, are you really saying she's not ready for high school calculus? Okay. We won that argument, but one of the things I found really interesting about the calculus class is that it was structured very differently from what you would have seen in a traditional high school calculus class. So this is actually, I think we have time to show this. This is the trailer. Can
If you have a little bit of ink,
Somebody in the chat, tell me whether you can hear the audio. Can you hear the audio?
Yes, we can, Michael.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is the trailer for the calculus class that my daughter took. And just, as you watch this, think about what you see that's different than a traditional calculus class.
if you have a little bit of anxiety around the idea of taking calculus, I would encourage you to give it a chance. We don't all learn in the same way.
So we are going to be teaching the same content
in different ways. I'd say my teaching style is somewhat laid back. I'm the only instructor that's using a blackboard.
and I prefer fountain pen and paper. I want to make calculus a bit more human.
I'll be teaching with a tablet. We're going to look at the infinitely large, the infinitely small.
There's going to be a lot of storytelling alongside calculus.
I hate to do this to my hometown team, but we're going to look at the Buffalo Bills fan base as our example for exponential decay. So here we go. Low D high minus high D low over low low. What? Let's piece it together.
There are these mathematical functions in the things that make us happy. This is an example of taking something on a roll and giving you more information through the equations. Basically, if you're in your 20s, enjoy it while it lasts. There is no reason why everyone shouldn't have access to the very best education.
I hope this course can be a gateway to help students from different backgrounds to start their college career.
Calculus is this place where once you've mastered the rules, you can let your curiosity run completely right.
Welcome to Calculus 1. Let's get started. Let's get started.
Let's get started.
So I hope I'm not putting that up as an ad for Outlier. But what I want to say is I think that's a wonderful example of adapting the delivery of the content to the medium, right? What do we see? Well, we see incredibly high production quality. We see three different professors, and I'll get back to that in a second. We see a class where, because of abundance, you're able to. My daughter was able to register for the class. They didn't say, "Do you have pre-calc?" And if you don't, you're not going to be able to register. What they said was, if you can pass this pretty basic algebra exam, we'll admit you. We think you've got the course. We think you've got the basics that's going to allow you to succeed in this class. And guess what? If you don't pass this class, and you put the effort in, we'll give you a full refund. That's just something we couldn't accomplish in a world where I only have 30 seats in the classroom. In the world where I've only got 30 seats in the classroom, you admit one student, you're going to do it at the expense of somebody else. In a world where I've got an infinite number of seats, I can take chances on students who might not fit the normal mold. Okay. The other thing they did was we had three different professors. Hannah Fry, University College London, John Urschel, MIT, and Tim Chartier at Davidson. Three different, different ethnicities, different genders, different styles of teaching. And the way they taught is they each taught the same calculus module, but they did it in their own style and they did it in their own voice. And you as a student can choose which one of these professors you take. And in fact, you can mix and match. If Hannah Fry's explanation didn't work for you, try Tim Chartier. Here's the trivia question. I wish this was more interactive, but the trivia question is, which of these three professors did my STEMinist daughter gravitate towards? And the answer is she immediately gravitated towards Hannah Fry. And I was talking to a colleague about this and saying, isn't it interesting that Molly's taking Hannah Fry's class instead of Tim Chartier and John Urschel? And my colleague said, "Oh, Mike, there's a whole bunch of research on this, which shows that in general, there's a difference between, men tend to perform better than women in general in quant classes. And that difference goes away when the class is taught by a woman. And guess what? The same thing is true in the context of underrepresented minorities. In general, there's a difference, and that difference goes away when the class is taught by someone who looks like you, someone you can identify with. That's something that's really hard to do in a traditional scarcity-based classroom, much easier to do online. The other example I give a lot is I was giving this talk at, let's just say, a top business school. In the meetings afterwards, I was talking to a faculty member, and she said, we at my business school, we have an exec education program. And this is it's a 6-week in-person program. We bring executives from across the world to our campus. They live here, they study next to each other. And we've always felt that in-person experience is vitally important. During COVID, the only thing that's wrong with we love everything about the class. The only thing that's wrong with the class is female executives aren't showing up in anywhere near the number we know they exist in the marketplace. Guess what? During COVID, we took that same program online, and female executives showed up in exactly the proportion you'd expect. And you think about that for a second, and what you realize is that through a set of processes that my daughter would rightly describe as the patriarchy, male executives are able to say to their family, I'm going to take the next 6 weeks and I'll be in another city, versus female executives. When I relax that constraint, I can include people who otherwise would have been included. And the benefits of including those folks were so great that this business school decided to take that executive education program online even after COVID. Arizona State, we typically think about this. We typically think about online versus in person as a 0-1 game. We're either all online or we're all in person. One of the examples I used in the book is, how does Arizona State teach organic chemistry online? And I got this example by interviewing your fantastic Professor R. Austin. And what Professor Austin said is, when we went to teaching organic chemistry online, we thought really long and hard about how are we going to do labs online, right? Are we going to send hydrochloric acid to people's homes? Are we going to hope they have fume hoods at their homes so they can do the experiment safely? No, we can't do that. But then we looked at our curriculum, and what we discovered is that most of this content works perfectly well online. So we'll deliver the content that works well online, and to do the chemistry labs, we'll bring the students on campus for a 1-week intensive organic chemistry experience. And what they discovered is that the students who did the class online had every bit the knowledge of organic chemistry labs as a student who did the class in a traditional residential setting, but they had a higher identity as scientists, that there was something about doing labs twice a day for a week in person with a cohort of other students that allowed them to leave saying, I'm a scientist, that you wouldn't get if you did those same labs week by week. Okay. And with that, I just want to say I am absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Michael. I loved your book. I loved your ideas. Thank you for packing them into this short period of time here, but you've given us a lot of things to think about. There are questions in our Q&A. I'm going to ask our audience to continue adding your questions. We have time here for a discussion with Michael, so get your questions in and we will try to get as many of them as possible. So let me start with this, and this was a question that kept coming up in my mind, both when I was reading your book, as I think about digital transformation, and then as I was listening to you today. You've highlighted how technology can shift from being perceived as a threat to an opportunity for advancing education. This is from one of our listeners here. What do you see as the most critical mindset shift that institutions need to adopt to truly embrace this transformation?
There are two things that are a challenge here. And I'm embarrassed to say both of them. One of them is just self-preservation. I think one of the biggest challenges we face is, you know, in the back of my mind, if I'm a faculty member in an online world, do you still need me? I know you need me to teach classes in person in 30, you know, in groups of 30. But do you still need me if I'm competing against the world's best people in my area? I perceive that's a scary thing for a lot of people. I know it's scary for me. What I've been trying to push back on that is, you know, is it scary enough for us to knowingly perpetuate a system that is disadvantaging kids solely because of the zip code they grew up in? Man, I hope it's not. Man, I hope it's not. The other thing is just the classic thing you hear in almost any study of disruptive change. And I heard this from a senior person at an anonymous college. You know, I gave this talk and I was meeting with him afterwards, and he said, you know what, Mike, I understand everything you're saying. I get everything you're saying, but I'm going to retire in 5 years. And my job is to keep the business running for the next 5 years. And I don't think this is going to, it's probably going to hit us, you know, 10 years down the road, but I don't see it hitting us in the next 5 years. So why shouldn't I just stick with what I'm doing? And the answer is, if you're playing on your own, you know, if you're playing on your own incentives, you're absolutely right. Take the easy route. If you want to do something brave and courageous that could actually make a difference in underprivileged students' lives, my goodness, we've got an opportunity here. Did that answer the question?
All right. You know, we have to speak to the fear component, right? It always gets in the way of change. And also this notion that this is just too big and complicated. I don't want to take it on my watch. Let this be the problem of whoever's coming next. Or maybe this is not as bad as we think it is, right? Neither of which is right. We need to be courageous as you speak. So here's a question that really points to sort of the scarcities that you identified as getting in the way, right? But given that universities control scarce seats, faculty, and credentials, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for universities in maintaining their competitive edge in a world moving towards digital abundance?
This is an interesting one. So first of all, I'm clear in the book in at least 10 different places that I don't think, you know, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, I don't think they're going, you know, I don't think they're going anywhere. And I think there are going to be a lot of universities that are, you know, this is not the death of the university. That's what my agent wanted me to call the book. Probably would have been much better for sales. I ended up calling it the Abundant University. So some universities are going to be just fine. I personally think the biggest challenge for us in the university system is the faculty experts, and let me explain why. There's this weird disconnect in higher education. I got tenure by becoming, you know, believe it or not, by becoming the world's leading expert in this incredibly narrow area of my field, right? So my value to the academy is I'm a specialist until I stand up in front of a group of students, and then I teach like a generalist, right? I know this part of the curriculum. You're better off listening to Catherine Tucker or Erik Jonsson or Natalia Lavina or Ed McFarlane on these other parts. The reason you're not learning from them is because, you know, Erik's at Stanford and Catherine's at MIT and Ed's at Harvard Business School, and Natalia's at NYU. Wouldn't it be cool if we could bring them in? Wouldn't it be cool if we could have a learning experience where you learn from the best in the world? Why is that going to be hard for universities? The obvious reason, right, is, you know, how am I going to incentivize those nice people who are at their universities to want to participate in something like that? Neither the university is going to be excited about that, nor the actual faculty member. But I think we do have an incredible opportunity to do that. In the book, I talk about, you know, there's a particular theory where I've done some research and I have a position. I think this is true about the world. Nita Elbersy at Harvard Business School has done her research. She comes to a very different conclusion. When I teach that, I almost always feel like I'm giving Anita's position, short shrift. Wouldn't it be cool if you could bring us both into the same room and have us, hash it out and the students leave with their own opinion? Why can't we do that? Well, we can't do that because of the existing structure.
So what if we change, let's just hypothetically think this through. So what if we change the structure in a way that it wasn't the student needing to be in the classroom learning from one professor, that these credentials were available in a more abundant fashion, right? Everybody did not need to learn the same way and end up with the same kind of credential. There is an interesting question here from one of our attendees. So do credentials that are obtained through an abundance education model have less value over time to the student? They're worrying that, if the abundance reduces value, like a media analogy, right? Movies have lower budgets, smaller revenues, less viewership. Is that going to be a problem in the thinking, or is there a way to get around that?
Yeah, so it depends on it depends on what you mean by value. And by the way, that as a society, the first question was, what's going to be hardest for education to do? As a society, I think the credential is going to be the hardest for us to do. And the reason is, if you're a hiring manager and you've got 100 applications, how are you going to limit that down to the 5 you're going to interview? Who has a 4-year degree? Where did those degrees come from? The same things I've always done. The example I give in the book is Google's actually taken a different path. What Google said is, we've looked at our data, and what we've discovered is that where you went to school, what your GPA was, what your major was, isn't all that predictive of how well you're going to do at Google relative to how well you do on our entrance test, right? If you can code, if you can code up a complicated algorithmic problem in a language of your choice in 30 minutes, I'm pretty sure you're a good coder, and I don't care where you got that knowledge from. And you might say, Mike, that's very specialized to coding. And you're right, but I gave that example to a buddy of mine who's a journalist. And what he said is, you know what, Mike, I won't hire a journalist unless I can see their Substack, right? Unless I can see their actual writing. Can you produce writing on a regular basis at a high quality? I don't care whether you went to Columbia's J School. I want to see whether you can actually write. And I think we're starting to see a bunch more places where you can get those signals in ways that don't involve $250,000 and 4 years of your time, and that don't advantage the disproportionately rich over qualified people who don't happen to live in the right zip code.
We hear a lot of chatter and noise about how universities are not adequately producing people who adequately are prepared to solve society's problems, right? And we hear this all over the world, primarily from businesses. So if the credential shift in society is the biggest barrier, what can universities do here? I mean, one, we may not want to change. People outside want us to change. What's going to cause either the people outside to put so much pressure on us to change, or what would it take for us to be proactive to that pressure from outside and then make the adjustments we need?
Two thoughts. One is that, and it's a set of slides that I cut, but the first set of slide is a bunch of quotes from different news stories that came out within the last 18 months. Each of them saying this company, this state, what have you, is reducing their reliance on the 4-year degree. Okay, so you do that build, and then the next build is a quote from the article saying, and we're doing it because we want a more diverse workforce, and we've realized we're never going to get the diversity we need if we continue to rely on elite colleges to give it to us. An analogy that maybe will work is, one of the questions I ask in my class is, why did Netflix need to vertically integrate into making their own content? right? It's not like the studios are making plenty of content. Why not just buy it, license it and distribute it? Why did you need to make your own content? And I think the answer to the question is Netflix realized that their business model was not based on mass market content. It was based on niche content. And they realized that the studios didn't have the incentive to make that niche content. They're trying to make content that works in primetime television or on the AMC multiplex. That Netflix realized to make their business run, they had to make the content themselves. I wonder whether employers are starting to realize they're in a similar situation. I'm never going to get the product I need, the educated student I need, if I continue to rely on elite universities. I'm going to have to vertically integrate into education if I want to produce the diverse workforce that I need. And I think we're starting to see that in a lot of settings. Jenny Rometty at IBM has talked a lot about not white collar jobs, but new collar jobs, and training people to work at IBM, even if you don't have a college degree. My son wanted to go to Harvard Business School until he realized that SAP's Sales Academy was every bit as selective, and in fact, more selective than Harvard Business School. And if you graduated from SAP Sales Academy, you were more or less guaranteed an account manager position. And now he's focused on SAP Sales Academy. Did that answer the question?
I mean, lots to think about, right? Who's going to put pressure on who as we move forward?
I think it's going to have to come from the marketplace, right? As long, like I said at the beginning, as long as we are the credentialer to the professional workforce, I think our business model is just fine. But I think we're starting to see some movement in the direction of employers pushing back on that. I think voters are pushing back on us. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of pushback from students themselves.
So there are lots of questions here about AI. And of course, how do you think about generative AI transforming higher education in the classrooms? Do you see AI as a tool to mitigate the inequities that exist in the system as well? So there's one, what can it do in the classroom to transform? And then two, what do you see as its capabilities to address the inequities?
So bunch of thoughts on AI. First of all, for anybody who's old enough to remember when Wikipedia came out, you'll also remember that all teachers said you can't use Wikipedia as a source, right? Do your own research. You'd be an idiot today if you were starting with something and you didn't at least look at Wikipedia. You shouldn't stop there, but it's a wonderful source of information, right? Today, we in higher education, in many cases, are saying you cannot use generative AI in my classroom. And yet we say we're preparing students for a world where they're going to go out in the workplace, and of course they're going to use generative AI. We need to help them understand how to use it. We need to help them understand the limitations of it, blah, blah, blah. But heck yeah. So that's number one. Number two is, I think generative AI can be an amazing resource for learning some of these, topics. A calculus again, right? Going to ChatGPT and saying, explain the chain rule to me again, or explain integration by parts. I've played around with this. You get pretty decent answers, right? You could go to the professor's office hours and maybe get a better answer. I don't know. But I do know that I'm the scarce resource. So I think generative AI has the potential to transform higher education. We still need to solve the credential problem. And I also know a lot of my students say that, when they don't understand something, generative AI is one of the first places they go to search. But I still think we're stuck on the credential problem.
We have a question here that says, so how long until credentials won't matter?
I think credentials will always matter. I think we're just going to get to a new set of credentials. Let me give you this analogy. Actually, I could turn my camera towards my whiteboard, but when I was writing the book, I had instruction seats and brand, and I had brand circled with a big question mark next to it. Brand is credential, right? And And I was, like really scratching my head. How do you replicate or replace the brand name of Carnegie Mellon University, where I no longer need to say, you graduated from Carnegie Mellon, you must be smart, where I can use another signal. And I swear to you, later that same day, I was buying a really expensive scanner from a manufacturer I'd never heard of before, solely because it had a 4.9 star rating on Amazon and a bunch of really positive reviews. And I was like, oh, that's how you reduce the value of a brand. You add in objective information about the quality of the product, right? I'll stay in complete strangers' homes instead of the Hilton because they have good reviews on Amazon. The other thing that's fun about that example is once we created a way for people to signal the quality of their product that didn't involve getting a Hilton franchise, all of a sudden we created all sorts of incentives for people who had, properties, Airbnbs, or bed and breakfasts, small non-affiliated hotels. All of a sudden we created incentives for them to actually invest in quality, right? If everybody's going to assume that because you're an independent hotel, you must be lousy, I have no incentives to invest in quality. Once I create a way for people to signal quality, all of a sudden I create this path for a whole bunch of people to start to invest. What's the parallel? I think we can release an amazing amount of economic productivity, not to mention social value, by giving people a new way of gaining the credentials that they need to participate in the marketplace, even if those credentials don't look like the pieces of paper we give at graduation.
So what are ways in which we can signal quality using digital tools that we couldn't do without these digital tools, right? I mean, if that's sort of one of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to address, how can we use digital tools to signal quality differently from what we've taken for granted for 500 years?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think one of them is creating a reliable, reliable and trusted signal that you've mastered this topic, right? For a long time, that was the that was the purpose of the diploma. Could we create a parallel way of saying you've mastered calculus at an A level, and I really don't care where you got that knowledge, or frankly, how long it took you to get that knowledge, blah, blah, blah. So that's one, is creating new ways that people can signal that knowledge that don't involve the traditional four-year degree. How can we in universities participate in that? I would love to see us get more involved in, micro-credentials and other things like that. How do you demonstrate soft skills? Go on LinkedIn and look at the LinkedIn credentials. People say, I want to endorse Mike Smith as doing this, that, or the other thing. That's a really interesting way of signaling that, this person has this credential that otherwise would be hard to test and hard to demonstrate. The other thing I think a lot, and that's very much in line with the notion of your college will get you your first degree, or get you your first job. Your degree will get you your first job. Once you've got that job, it becomes much more about how well did you perform on the job, blah, blah, blah. I wonder whether we can create new ways that people can signal those things to the market in non-traditional ways.
We've talked a little bit about how technology can change the way education is delivered and experienced within universities. So I want to pause here and come back to the access question, or the access idea that you began your talk with, right? So at ASU this year, we now have 181,000 students. For the first time, we have more online students than students who are taking courses with us on ground. How should we and others think about access? Is it just continuing to do what we are doing and organically growing that model, or are there ways that we should think radically about increasing access because we now have these technologies.
What do you mean by access? Do you mean access of students to the courseware or?
Yes,
Okay.
access of students to education, whether it's micro-credentials or undergraduate degrees or graduate degrees. Now we've opened up the university using online education platforms. Is that enough? Can we just get more people in and then that becomes our solution to access, or should we be thinking about access in other and different ways?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have done a great job of this, but you know, getting the cost down, reaching out to students who might come from a background that, you know, they wouldn't normally think college is an option. My wife is a first-generation college student. My college path was given to me by my parents, who I love dearly. But it was, you'll go to the University of Maryland, you'll be an engineer, and we've got money set aside for you. No one told her to do that. I love my in-laws dearly, but it just wasn't on their radar. She went to college because she had a guidance counselor in her senior year who said, "What are you doing next year?" And she said, "I don't know, I'll probably, get it." And I said, No, you need to go to college, right? So I think increasing that outreach to say, not only is this an opportunity for you, but I would love for us to come up with new ways of signaling, and you can do it. Here's a college class. Play around with it. I'm trying to remember the group who does it. It's I'm gonna hate myself an hour from now. But there's a group that delivers Harvard poetry classes to inner city students with the same rigor of a Harvard class. And you've got all these students discovering, I'm good at poetry, right? And I can pass this Harvard class. Wow, there's this opportunity open to me. So I think sort of moving downstream might be one option of doing this, particularly for kids whose, education background might not signal to them, you need to go to college.
As you're talking about poetry and all the ways in which we can teach using technology, here is a question about how do you suggest that we embrace digital media in training of fields that are based on human interaction, knowing that nonverbal communication is not as effective in digital media compared with in-person settings. So we see calculus and we say, yes, that all makes real perfect sense. What about some of these other areas?
Yeah. Let me give a roundabout answer, which is the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is right behind me. I have the University of Pittsburgh's head of data, who's also my cardiologist, come and give a talk to my class about how is data and technology changing healthcare. And right after COVID, what he said is, we've looked at our data, and what we've discovered is that for most doctor-patient interactions, telehealth yields equivalent health outcomes as if you'd come into the office. There's some things you got to come into the office for, right? But for most things, this works just fine. I would love for us in higher education to go through the really hard part, the really hard task of saying what needs to be done in person and what can be done perfectly well online. Are some of these interpersonal things that need to be done online? Great. Arizona State has, shown us a path forward, which is let's do it online, but let's do it in person, but let's do it in a very different way. It doesn't have to be 14 weeks, 2 semesters a year for 4 years at a very high cost. It's this particular skill in this particular time frame. I think that's my answer to that question that I guess get asked a lot, right? How do we do the soft skills? Maybe we can't do them online, but I still don't believe that it has to be all done in person.
So we have a comment here that you're referring to poetry in America. And one of our colleagues is pointing out that this is also broadly available through ASU's Learning Enterprise. So for those of you that want to check it out, please go ahead and do that. So another question then about.
And by the way, I was
Yeah.
referring to the National Education Equity Lab. I knew it would come to me, Neil. So go ahead.
We got that. Going back to where we began this discussion, we know that everybody is not sort of embracing the shifts to technology, and there are those that are moving in that direction, some sitting on the fence. Are you seeing certain types of institutions moving faster than others, or are there ways to group those that you see are moving ahead versus those that are not exactly moving at the same speed?
Here's what's interesting to me, and I spent some time talking about this in the book. I think you could make a pretty compelling argument that Harvard and MIT had it. Like if you think about disruption, how do you respond to disruption? I think Harvard and MIT had it with Harvard X and MIT X, right? They had a way to extend their brand name in a way that didn't cannibalize their core product. And I spend a lot of time in the book trying to motivate the idea that the reason it didn't work is because the faculty got in the way of its success. Because it looks kind of scary to our brand name. And we're Harvard, we're MIT, we're going to be just fine. I think where we're seeing the innovation is from universities that don't have as much need to protect that brand name. And I hope I'm not going to get in trouble, but I think Southern New Hampshire University and Arizona State University, Georgia Tech with its online masters in computer science have done incredible things that I don't think you would have gotten out of Harvard, MIT, Stanford, because they're busy protecting their top 10 US News and World Report rankings. Did that answer your question? Did that answer the question? And have I gone dark yet?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was just a question that people were curious to see, if there were certain groups of institutions moving ahead faster than other groups.
Yeah, I think it's the institutions. You need two things, and I think in each case I can demonstrate this. You need the ability to say, I've stopped trying to protect all the values that were important in the old world, U.S. News and World Report rankings, and I've gotten much more interested in using the technology to do what I know it can do. And then you also need a really strong leader who says, and we're going to do this, right? Sort of a Steve Jobs or Bob Iger level of, no, we're going to do this. It's going to be really hard, but here are the benefits.
Do you see any downsides to the abundance education model? This is a question from one of our participants.
Downsides to the abundance. I mean, there's certainly, the romantic notion of here's the answer, right? I do miss the energy in the classroom when I'm teaching online, right? That there is a fun energy in the classroom with discussions that is hard to replicate in an online world. What I'll say is I don't miss it so much that I'm willing to knowingly say the only way you can participate in the professional workforce is getting a 4-year degree and spending 6 figures. I think the benefits vastly outweigh any downsides. The downsides are there. I totally get it. But at the end of the day, I think here's maybe a way to reframe it. I think we need to create options, right? I don't think the 4-year degree is going away, but I think it's wrong for us to stand in the way of creating other options for people to gain those skills, demonstrate their knowledge in the marketplace, and contribute to society. And students should be able to choose, these are the different modalities. This is the one I'm choosing.
I see some of our attendees expressing concerns around, what would happen to local professors, in smaller places as technology becomes the way we move forward. I mean, we could see a future in which those 3 videos of faculty teaching calculus may not really be human faculty, right? And so, you know, I was just reading a comment here that there could be other things that we're not thinking about, you know, certainly from a student perspective, choice, access to higher education, the opportunity to learn what they need to learn, the opportunity to demonstrate mastery of content in new ways. And yet, is there something about the workforce that currently exists in higher education that is going to be impacted in some ways that perhaps we are not anticipating?
Yeah, that's fair, right? And I totally get it. One of the articles I use in class, I've forgotten the author now, but it's basically, he asks, you know, he's asking people, how many calculus professors do we need to teach online? And the answer he settles on is, you know, 5, right? 1 to teach in English, 1 to teach in French, 1 to teach in Mandarin, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then a few, it's, but it's a much small, whatever the number is, it's a much smaller number than the number we've got right now. I get that that's scary. The notion that kids in the bottom 20% are 77 times less likely to get access to elite colleges than kids in the top 1% is far more scary to me. Yeah.
As you can see, people worry in all different ways around this. There's a lot of worry around credentials and credentialing that I'm seeing in our conversations. You know, it's interesting because we speak to colleagues in higher education in other countries where they do not really have, many places do not have, the universities don't have the option to just offer non-degree credentials because they need to be regulated by some authority that says, yes, your certificate in this thing actually is valuable, and you know there's a stamp of approval. So you know, as you were talking about the LinkedIn idea or sort of a community-based way of evaluating credentials, there's a lot of worry about that here, right? As to, you know, what are all the ways that, you know, credentialing itself could get out of control and be this beast that we may not be able to put back into the box. So what are your thoughts about that?
Fair enough.
Yeah,
And I mean, let me be careful. Maybe I went too far in saying LinkedIn, you know, LinkedIn has credentials. That's going to, let me be, I definitively did not say LinkedIn credentials are going to replace everything. I think it's an interesting way of thinking about, can we develop credentials that don't require you to spend 4 years and $250,000 to get. The example I think of with my oldest son, is he went to Drexel. Drexel has an integrated co-op program. He walked out, I think he learned far more in his co-ops than he did in a lot of his classes. And he walked out with the ability to say, I've done, you know, I've done sales support at SAP. I interned at SAP. I interned at this company, this company, this company. And you can go talk to my manager, and they'll tell you, you know, how well I did. I think those credentials, if you will, served him much better in his job search than getting an A in microeconomics. That's, I think, what I'm saying. How do we scale that? That's an interesting question.
You know, I think you're spot on. We were just reflecting some of the concerns and fears that people have about the credentials, which is starting to become a real issue, right? If everybody offers credentials, universities and business organizations, and everybody is in that marketplace with credentials, one, how do we know the quality of the credentials? And I think somewhere behind that is also the question of, what is the difference between a university offered credential versus that credential from SAP that is leading into a job?
Fair enough. I would argue we in higher education have abused our monopoly position as the grantor of credentials. And in a free and fair market, we should have more competition there. What does that look like? I don't know exactly, but it can't look like the best way to become rich is to get a college degree, and the best way to get a college degree is to be rich. What we're doing today is unacceptable. We've got to change. I'm more than happy to talk about different options, but we can't stay where we are.
No arguments on that point. And yes, to the monopoly that we've had that's gotten in the way of our own capacity to innovate, right, as higher education. There are lots of questions here from some of our international colleagues who are joining in. But I want to bring something back to the access issue as well. We talk about digital tools, reducing the gap between the rich kids and the poor kids, right? To get in and get access to higher education. And yet there are lots of places in the country where truly the poor kids don't have basic technologies where they are, right? So are you seeing sort of the digital literacy preparation to engage with technology in some ways? Is that going to make the gap even worse as technology moves us forward, or is eventually technology going to make that gap go away?
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of, I was very intentional about not touching K through 12 just because I have never stood up in front of a class of angry 15-year-olds. We need to push technological literacy back as far as we can. There's undoubtedly a technology gap. The wonderful thing about technology is prices are going down exponentially. And so I think we've got an opportunity to do that. While the price of a university degree has outpaced inflation by 4x, the price of technology is going down. I think that gives us a huge opportunity to push back that technology gap to a place where it's not a hindrance, but it's a much smaller delta.
And universities should think about what they can do in the communities that they are in to help with that technology gap. ASU is doing a lot of work in that space, but it seems to me that the forward-thinking focus on technology must also consider those that are getting left behind in those earlier stages. Here's a question on how in this digital age, as there are lots of national conversations on loneliness and people feeling isolated. There's a question on, how can we overcome that sort of lack of connection that people seek to have in virtual classes, especially for students who feel nervous or unprepared for college in the first place? Like, what is that piece that we might think of?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for us to develop new processes to incorporate that. I'll riff off of Daphne Kohler. I think this is Daphne Kohler. Daphne Kohler is a Stanford professor. She's one of the architects of one of the first massively online courses. She was teaching, 500,000 people worldwide. And what she said is she discovered that there were study groups forming worldwide. And I think one of them was an example of a study group in England of working moms who would get together to talk about the class material that Professor Kohler was teaching. When you scale this, you've got a whole bunch of new ways to create that personal interaction. The other thing I would say about being shy is I actually found Zoom education created a great opportunity for students who were shy in the classroom to contribute. So on Zoom, it was much easier for me to say, hey, let's create a breakout room and let's go in your breakout rooms and talk. And then let's come back and share what you've learned with the class. And I found that, sort of in a lot of ways, students who were shy about saying, maybe what I'm saying, no one's gonna agree with. If you can talk about it in a group of 5 people, that they were much more willing to come back to class and say, no, here's what I think's going on. So I don't know that it's an all or nothing. I don't know that it's the only way we can properly socialize people is in person, and online is necessarily inferior. What I will say is I hear that a lot, right? One of the interesting things when I give this talk is, about About a half hour in, some professor is going to raise their hand and say, no, Mike, this isn't going to work. And we know that because the online education we delivered during Zoom was a complete disaster. And that's basically a direct quote. And after about the fourth time I got asked that, I realized how to respond. And so the next time I gave the talk, I came prepared and I said, oh, that's really interesting. How much worse do you think it was? Like, do you think it was 20% worse than what the students paid for, or maybe 50% worse than what the students paid for? Well, I don't know, you know, somewhere in that range. Oh, it's really interesting. How much of a discount did your university offer for what you know to be an inferior product? And if the answer is 0, then unpack that for me, right? So I don't think we get a free pass by saying, you know, the online education we delivered was a complete disaster. B, the assumption is the online education we delivered during COVID represents the gold standard of what is possible with the medium and can never be improved upon, right? That can't possibly be true. So if you're saying we're not doing it well yet today, I think I'm going to argue we've got a whole bunch of opportunities to do better. And we've got a whole bunch of data to do better with. So one thing I'll say is some of the research that got me interested in this initially, we worked with Masterclass, and we got data on the characteristics of the education that was being delivered. So we coded, you know, is the professor smiling? Are they frowning? What's their, how much are they moving their hands? How fast are they talking? What's the sentiment of their speech? So create a whole bunch of characteristics of how the education is being delivered, and then use that to measure student engagement. Because we also got data on, you know, how did the student continue to watch this? Did they watch the next lecture? We've got a whole bunch of data now that we can use to actually measure how effective is this? Should we be doing this differently? Should I be talking slower? Should I be waving my hands less? Once you've got that two-way exchange of information, I think we've got a whole bunch of new cool opportunities for improving things.
Yeah.
So I'm much more optimistic.
As we all should be, right? There are so many more tools available now. There's so much more data. And I think if anything, the pandemic has really told all of us around the world that we can, in fact, teach and learn using technology. The question is how innovative and creative can we be to make that a rich, valuable experience it must be for our students. Question here on how will the abundant university remake research in academia?
Yeah, this is a question I've never answered in public. So let me think hard about how I'm going to answer. It's true that what I'm talking about might reduce our ability to fund research at the level we're funding it today. Absolutely no doubt about that. The challenge we've got is that the tuition subsidizes the research. And so to the extent that the tuition goes away, I don't know how to solve that problem. That's A. B is, I also said earlier that I don't think Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, I hope Carnegie Mellon, I don't think they're going away. So I wonder whether we might end up with a world where we've got less research total, but it's still being done. And maybe it's being done by the most impactful universities. Yeah, I hadn't prepared for that question.
Well, there's a lot to think about there, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. Is the university system doing more research than is economically optimal? Are we doing research because we're changing the world, or are we doing research because I need 6A publications if I'm going to get tenure? I'm not convinced we're at the societal optimal.
You know, I wish we had more time to unpack this one. I also wonder if you know, the proliferation of digital tools forces us to do research in new ways, that we will find new areas to do research in, because we now have these tools and because we have all of these capabilities that we didn't not even, a decade ago, not even 5 years ago, right? So there may be sort of research growing in new and interesting ways and interdisciplinary ways because we have access. Still, I think there's a lot to be thinking about in that space, but I'm also the person minding the clock here. And we have 3 minutes to go. So Mike, I know you've studied ASU, you've spent time here, you understand what we are doing. We have embraced the ideas you're laying out. We are not challenging that in any way. We are moving ahead, walking through these issues that came up in the conversation. What thoughts do you want to leave behind for the ASU community in specific as we close out this conversation?
I'm so incredibly excited about what Arizona State is doing to create access for people who wouldn't have otherwise had access to a college degree. B, I'm so incredibly excited going forward about the potential for ASU to use the data that is being generated by online learning to improve online learning in the future. I think this is one of the things I talked about at the beginning is one of the cool things is once the entertainment is data, once the entertainment is digital, I can collect data about it and I can customize I can use that data to customize the interface. I would love for us to do much more research into what is the optimal way of delivering education? Is it sitting quietly for 80 minutes at a time, twice a week for a 14-week semester? Or is it something else? And how is it different for student A versus student B? Could I give student A exactly the experience that they need while also giving student B exactly the experience they need, using what I know about them to customize how the content is delivered to them? That to me is the most exciting opportunity we've got here. And I love the fact that you guys are leading in that.
Well, we'll take that to heart and continue to plow through what we can learn from data as we continue to experiment and test new ways of using technology both for access and excellence in education. Mike, thank you, first of all, for writing a wonderfully readable book.
Thank you.
That was incredible, for pushing forward this idea that is so important. So we do not have any university president making the kinds of quotes that you started this lecture with, right? That we're all leaning in and moving our institutions forward for the sake of our students, for the sake of our communities. Thank you for being here today, for accepting our invitation, for the ideas and this conversation. It was such a pleasure to have you here and virtually, and we look forward to hosting you in person on campus to have deeper conversations. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, Minu. Thank you, Michael. Really exciting.
Everybody, for all those that hung in there with us, you know that the recording is available on the Frank Rhodes website. Feel free to use that, share it with everybody else that you think would find this helpful. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.